Welcome, everyone. Well, today we are talking about Pennidius the Connector. This is one of the chapters in the book by Ryan Holiday called Lives of the Stoics. And if you've been reading along with us, you'll note that some of these chapters are short, so others are longer. This is simply because of the amount of information that we have on these ancient and Middle Age Stoics from back in those two periods. Some of their lives, some of the lives of these Stoics were there wasn't much recorded about it. So, but today, luckily, we do have a lot to talk about with Pennidius Connector, the Connector. I'm going to share my screen so you can follow along on the outline that I've prepared. I'm going to start with a reading of the best paragraph, in my opinion, from this chapter. This is a paragraph that I think represents who Pennidius was. A soldier has to manage their obligations as a human, as a warrior, as a member of a family, or as an immigrant, or as a wealthy heir, and as a person who has made promises and commitments to friends, to families, to business partners. The pieces of the equation are different for a head of state or a beggar, but the complicated balance and the need for guidance is the same. Now, this brings out a very important part of the biography of Pennidius, because one of the big influences that he had in life is on a general named Scipio. And Scipio was known to be a little bit excitable and frenetic at times. And so Pennidius helped him balance those things, balance his ambition with ethics and being moral towards other people. So that's one important thing that we're going to hear in the discussion today. First, I'll start Pennidius of Rhodes. He lived from about 185 to 109 BC. And initially, he studied under Cratius, then under Diogenes of Babylon and Antipater of Tarsus, who we reviewed last week. And Ryan Holiday expresses that Pennidius would be learning with these different teachers. He'd be learning Stoicism for about 5 years and started going through a cycle of learning and teaching again and again, learning and teaching. This, I think, accelerated the process for Pennidius. We also need to keep in mind that Antipater, who was the sixth leader of the Stoic school, died about the year 130, and Pennidius became the seventh leader of the Stoic school. He would then lead that school for about 20 years. His major student, in turn, as he passed down the influence to the next generation, his major student was Posidonius of Apamea, and who did very much like his teacher, Pennidius. He traveled a lot, talked to a lot of people, spread the word of Stoicism to the Roman world. All right, item number 2. Now, this is the important part of his friendship with Scipio. The Scipionic Circle was the name of a kind of an informal group back in those days. Pennidius, Gaius Laelius, and Scipio Aemilianus, they were the three major people in this group, and Scipio was the most powerful in the group. He had a large estate. They would have these meetings at his house, and basically, Pennidius was the intellectual in the group. So Scipio relied upon him for his knowledge of morality and ethics. And I think another important thing is, for those of you who are interested in Googling this history, the Scipionic Circle is a good keyword to use. But also keep in mind that when you look up the name Scipio Aemilianus, you may find references that are incorrect at times. I even found one scholarly article that confused this Scipio with another Scipio. There was a Scipio Africanus and a Scipio Asiaticus. They all lived within like 100 or so years of each other, and I guess Scipio was a popular name at that time. But so watch out for those references if you are Googling further. And item number 3 is connecting Stoicism with Roman ethics. This is one of the reasons why I think that Ryan Holiday has called Pennidius the the connector, because he is connecting two large bodies of knowledge, the Stoicism, which had been developed up until that time, and the Roman ethics and the Roman culture. And I think Pennidius, from my research, did have a large effect on the Roman elite at that time. That's a little bit mentioned in this chapter, but you'll see it also in other articles on Pennidius. And I think another way that Pennidius was able to connect things is he was, with his practical nature, he was able to connect this wisdom of Stoicism to everyday life. That, of course, is what we're trying to do with the modern Stoicism movement. We're trying to connect things in a very practical way so we can make improvements in our life. Number 4, Pennidius was also a moderator to Scipio. This is what I mentioned at the top of the description, top of the outline, is that Scipio did have a frenetic side, and Pennidius helped balance his ambition and his ethics. And also Scipio, it's important to note that Scipio did include him as a very close friend, and he even took him on trips through Egypt and Syria and other countries. I think that in the book, Ryan Holiday calls these trips fact-finding missions, or at least that's what they would be called today by a government. But let's move to number 5 so I can give you an interesting insight on this. Number 5 has a paragraph from Ryan Holiday's description of Pennidius going on one of these trips. And now keep in mind that Pennidius was not the kind of person who believed in soothsayers and ritual sacrifices of the day. He was very practical through and through, and this reputation preceded him. So here, Ryan writes, Plutarch tells a colorful story of this nearly 2-year fact-finding mission in his book Moralia, Roman Sayings, that when Scipio arrived in Alexandria, traveling in a retinue which included Pennidius and 5 servants, the people were in such a frenzy that they yelled for Scipio to take off his toga off his head so they could get a good look. And when they did, the masses burst into applause. He writes that the Egyptian king Ptolemy the Fat, number 8, could hardly keep up with them in walking because he had a very inactive life, and his pampering of his body. Scipio whispered softly to Pennidius, already the Alexandrians have received some benefit from our visit, for it is owing to us that they have seen their king walk. In other words, he wasn't seen walking very much. Now, I think that this is an important reference. The way that I interpret this, and I'll be interested in hearing your interpretations later, but because Pennidius was not into the soothsaying and the mystical side of life, I think that here the big revelation to the citizens of that country were that they could see their king for the first time as a person having just difficulty walking, getting around town. They had previously, by the way, Ptolemy the Eighth was very much revered as a god and had cults that followed him, and they threw festivals for him. And so they didn't really see the ruler as a person. And so this was the first time that they could see through that, that mystical presence, you might say. All right, number 6 is Pennidius's book. His most famous book is called Concerning Appropriate Actions. And this book is about being a moral person towards others. We can also find this as a link in the chain to the modern term cosmopolitanism, that again, where we need to treat other people in a good fashion. And in this book, Pennidius also, besides the morality side, he's also suggesting that each of us have our own unique character, that we develop our potential. This is something that Cicero at the time very much favored. He gave the book a favorable review, saying that it was a thorough discussion of moral duties at the time. And this is something that, keep in mind, not only helps as a link in the chain for our Stoicism history, but also the Stoics very much influenced Emerson and Thoreau, and they have another interesting way of describing this developing of your unique self and your own leadership. Is the American Transcendentalist said that when you walk through the forest, instead of following an existing path, you should carve out a fresh path of your own. In that way, you are discovering the world and yourself, and you're improving yourself that way. All right, we're getting close to the takeaways. Number 7. These are the 3 main items that I think we could focus on. What Pennidius offered us is, first of all, he gave us a simplified view of Stoicism. He found ways of using simple language to communicate it to not only to the public, but to the Roman society. And second of all, he asked us to be alert at all times, be ready if someone should attack us. This is something very similar to that famous quote by Marcus Aurelius. In fact, I think that Marcus could have been influenced by this quote. Remember when Marcus wrote in his Meditations, "The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing, because an artful life requires being prepared to meet and withstand sudden and unexpected attacks." So that's right in line with what Pennidius was writing. And let's see, what else? Oh, yes, and also to find fulfillment in leadership is the third main area that I think Pennidius gave to us. He wanted us to follow virtue. And this, of course, as a leader, not only following virtue, but also we would be living according to nature, that phrase that is often repeated through the Stoic texts. So in conclusion, one of the themes that I think that we can focus on for Pennidius is that he made Stoicism into an art of life, or a lived philosophy. That's a phrase that I know from the 1950s and forward has become a phrase of increasing relevance, is a lived philosophy. And I think that Pennidius gave us this art of living, or this lived philosophy, by influencing the Roman elites and fusing the ideas of Stoicism with their ethics and their culture. Cicero recognized this at the time, and in my limited Latin, I can quote Cicero by saying, "Quae multum in his libris secundus sum non interpretatus," which basically means that Cicero said, "I have read much of his writings, and I praise him for that."